Russia continued to launch missiles and drones throughout Ukraine yesterday, marking the third day in a row of intense bombardment targeting civilian areas. Ukraine's military reported another round of more than 350 drones and missiles launched throughout the country. In the past week, Ukraine says Russia has launched north of 1,300 drones and almost 100 missiles. At least 30 civilians have been killed and more than 150 people have been injured. And amid Russia's intensifying attacks on Ukraine, the Kremlin is pushing back at President Trump's recent criticism of Vladimir Putin, suggesting Trump is suffering from, quote, emotional overload that comes after Trump on Sunday said Putin had gone, quote, absolutely crazy. Speaking to reporters, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov thanked President Trump for starting the negotiation process to end the war, while also suggesting the president was emotional over the issue. Peskov then went on to claim Russia's intense bombing campaign over the past 3 days was retaliatory in nature. Vladimir Putin met yesterday with Turkey's foreign minister at the Kremlin. It's the same Turkish official who mediated the talks in Istanbul earlier this month between Russian and Ukrainian officials. Meanwhile, Germany's new chancellor said his country and Western allies, including the UK, France, and United States, are no longer imposing range restrictions on any weapons supplied to Ukraine. Let's stop right there and talk about what that means, the range restrictions, and how that will impact the fight, David, and then your analysis on this Putin-Trump situation in terms of name-calling and other things.
So, Mika, Chancellor Merz's announcement that the range limits will be removed is significant in terms of the damage that these missiles can do to Russian cities as far away as Moscow. The German Taurus missile is reportedly able to reach 300 miles, which would allow it to hit Moscow. The British Storm Shadow has got a range of 155 miles. The ATACMS missiles that the U.S. supplies can go 190 miles, but there have been limits on how much of that range can be used. And the Russians have simply moved their key airfields and supply depots back out of range. So this is a significant step to put targets that would be valuable to Russia within range of weapons that Ukraine either has or is getting in large quantities, like the German Taurus. More generally, Mika, this moment right now is crunch time for Donald Trump on Ukraine and on Russia. Vladimir Putin, in effect, has disrespected him directly. I made a survey of all the statements that Trump has made since January, threatening sanctions, warning Putin, telling Putin if he didn't come to the table, there'd be trouble. And Putin has ignored every one of them. He's refused the compromise proposals that Trump has suggested. He's refused a ceasefire. So now Trump really is in the situation where he's going to have to exert some real pressure on Putin to get these negotiations back on track, or visibly give up as the Russians fire their ballistic missiles and drones on Kyiv, which would be very, very unattractive, I want to say humiliating situation for Trump.
So, Richard, this is Vladimir Putin knowing what he has in Donald Trump, that Donald Trump hasn't put any real pressure on him, that he can kind of act with impunity, as he's begun to do now with these drone strikes and missiles shot at civilians inside of Ukraine. A fascinating dynamic here between President Trump and President Putin, where you have Donald Trump saying, I don't know what the hell happened to Putin. I've known this guy a long time, to which everyone in the foreign policy community says this is exactly who Vladimir Putin is and always has been. The response from the Kremlin is that Donald Trump is just being emotional. They've used that word a couple of times now. What's going on here?
Donald Trump is not the first American leader to exaggerate the importance of his personal chemistry with a Soviet or Russian leader. FDR did it with Stalin. George W. Bush did it with Putin, and so forth. So he's in a long line of American leaders who have gotten this wrong and somehow think that personal chemistry or personal relationships are really critical. They're never critical. And Trump should have learned that not just with Putin, but with, say, the leader of North Korea or with China. There's a limit to what personal things do in diplomacy. What this shows is we're being played. Putin's uninterested in a ceasefire. He wants to continue prosecuting the war for the simple reason that he thinks he's winning, even though what he's gaining is marginal. The real question, by the way, is how we respond to it. The option out there in the Senate is secondary sanctions. Problem with those is historically, we've tried them before, and you end up having a massive friction between the United States, in this case it would be India, Turkey, and other countries, China, rather than with Russia. They tend not to work as decisively as people want. The real question, and this administration is not talking about it, seems unwilling to do it, is to help Ukraine and to basically give Ukraine the arms it needs, not to liberate every square inch of territory, just to defend itself, to send the message to Putin that more war isn't going to do the answer. One other thing, it was really interesting, the report by the new chancellor of Germany talking about taking off range restrictions. The assumption in the Trump administration is that if we end arming Ukraine, that'll weaken Ukraine and this will bring the war maybe more to a close. Actually, just the opposite. We are going to lose any leverage or influence. So what you're actually going to see is something of an escalation of target selection. And the war, the scale or scope of the battlefield is actually going to widen rather than shrink if the United States distance itself from Ukraine.
And right now, the United States is still sharing intel. It's not stopping sending assistance there, but certainly there's no more money coming, new money coming. As I first reported a couple of weeks ago, that Trump has a package of sanctions in front of him, and he's kind of, I'm told by aides, sort of vacillating back and forth whether or not he wants to apply them. To this point, he has not. And David Ignatius, we know there's also this bipartisan bill with 80 co-sponsors, 80 plus co-sponsors at this point. Lindsey Graham, obviously a close Trump ally, although not afraid to break with him occasionally on foreign policy issues, is the one who introduced it. Senator Blumenthal, others quickly hopped on board. Do you have any sense there from people that you talk to on the Hill, others, that there's going to be enough pressure here to push this through, for the House, but also for President Trump to finally get there some sort of punishment for Putin? Because as we have well chronicled, yes, once in a while, Trump offers harsh words for Putin in Moscow, but there's never, ever been any follow-through.
So it's hard for me to imagine Republicans in the Senate pushing these sanctions over the strong opposition of Trump. I think it's going to go differently. I think Trump, Lindsey Graham is going to go to Trump and say, Mr. President, you're being disrespected. This is humiliating. You need to take action. And Trump will encourage this process. There was reporting last night from the Wall Street Journal that elements of the Trump administration, the Trump White House, were nearing that point of openly supporting sanctions themselves. I do think this war is about to get, as Richard was suggesting, a lot dirtier. The attacks on cities by Russia have been brutal, but there are attacks on cities now increasingly by Ukraine. Ukraine has drones that are able to penetrate, get to Moscow and its environs. And they also have the capability to wage on the ground a dirty war of sabotage, of assassination. I've met with leaders of Ukrainian military intelligence. They are very, very tough, and they have networks inside Russia, as Russia has networks inside Ukraine that can do a lot of damage. So as bad as this war has been, it could tip into a much nastier phase of dirty war, unless Trump decides this is the moment we got to back them up. I would just note, since the overwhelming attacks of early Monday morning, the attacks that I monitor on my systems have fallen off, as if the Russians are having second thoughts. Maybe we ought to slow down and do some talking.
So you mentioned the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal editorial board has a new piece on that angle entitled "Time for a GOP Senate Revolt on Sanctions Against Putin." It reads in part, Mr. Trump may be the only person in the world still surprised by how Mr. Putin is behaving. The Russian is the same man he's been for 2 decades, bent on reconstituting as much of the old Soviet empire as he can get away with. Ukraine is his obsession. He's not going to modify his ambitions merely because Mr. Trump alternates between begging for peace and scolding outbursts on social media. Senator Lindsey Graham has 82 co-sponsors on a bill that would hit countries that buy Russian oil and gas with tariff sanctions, combined with the promise of more arms to Ukraine when the current supply runs out. These sanctions might change Mr. Putin's calculations about the price of war. But GOP senators can act or not, whether or not Mr. Trump approves. They can vote on the sanctions bill and force the president to face the hard reality of Mr. Putin's ambitions that Mr. Trump would rather avoid.